Welcome all. We are just getting the live stream queued up, and then we'll have a short video before we start the entire discussion. So just one moment. Thanks.
Tanya, we're live. We can start.
Yeah, go for it. Thank you. Welcome everyone, and we'll just start with a short video introduction.
Mahal, kailangan ko yung phone ko.
Kaslaap kumaken ka udanum hanapiksa tagayo sa kagpababa ingana waya waya uway taem kadikadwa tidanum ijay bantay nagayus nagpababa ingana ijay bye-bye uway urayan yati ikastam uray man nula pedam mabiru kanalata dalanti waya waya uway uray man numabulanan uray man numatawanan isulat tati madanunan bye-bye kalawaan uway ika-iyarikan na tidanong hanapisa dangadang ti umili sigurado agbaligi uway may dadanas nga umili bumangbangon lumablaban isudati sa diri pa ng baliw ti kagimungan uway uray anya mantirikat mabayag mantigubat isulat tati madanunan nawaya masabayan uway
So welcome everyone to this webinar about the financing of hydropower dams by the Asian Development Bank and our concerns about this continued trend of the ADB. I'm Tanya Roberts-Davis, and I'm the Just Transition Advocacy Coordinator with the NGO Forum on ADB. And as many of you are aware, this webinar is taking place in the immediate lead up to the Asian Development Bank's annual meeting starting next week in Xi'an. And it also coincides with the commemoration of Cordillera Day, which, as you saw in the video, marks solidarity with Indigenous peoples of the Cordillera and beyond in their struggles for self-determination, land, and livelihood. So in the coming hour and a half, you will hear more first about the analysis that we as the NGO Forum on ADB have done about the ADB's financing of hydropower dams since it introduced its 2009 energy policy up until today, when they now have their new energy policy adopted in 2021. And then you will hear firsthand information from Jiten Yunam of the Center for Advocacy and Research in Manipur in India about the impacts of ADB financed hydropower projects in the north of the country there, from Dr. Chusapelli of Green Alternative NC Bank Watch in Georgia about the realities on the ground of built and proposed hydropower projects by the ADB. And then Eugene Simonov of Rivers Without Boundaries International Coalition, who will speak about the concerns related to ADB's technical assistance and financing of associated facilities of dams in Mongolia. And then after that, we'll circle back to the Philippines to hear from Beverly Longid, who's the global coordinator of the Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, and also work with the Cordillera Peoples Alliance. So first, to give a bit of background on our own research that we've been doing on the ADB's financing, I'll just share my screen. All right. So basically what you can see is that the ADB had over the course of over the course of 2009 to 2021, they had two different policies. One, sorry, one moment.
Tanya, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I don't know if, okay. I think I just had some kind of Zoom crash. Sorry about that. Okay, so basically to start off here, we have the ADB's policy language, which we were looking at between 2009 and 2021, so starting off, you can see that actually the policy language is quite similar, except for the fact that one of the changes that has taken place is that the addition of a guidance note on large hydropower. But over this time, in the interim, basically the ADB provided close to $3 billion for technical assistance and loans for large hydropower. And then this was primarily concentrated in India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and India, with significant support for hydropower development also in Georgia. And the concerns of the impacts of these projects have been raised repeatedly through the ADB's accountability mechanism and clearly written throughout the ADB's own documents. And yet there is this consistent lack of consideration for alternative projects, project siting or alternative options, let alone the no project option for when the ADB is considering hydropower project proposals. And instead, they've consistently been framing hydropower as an environmentally sound investment that can help member countries with their so-called climate commitments, and with all issues being so-called mitigated or rectified through supporting no net loss plans, so-called, and increasingly we're hearing them shift towards talking about the hydropower dams as being necessary as part of the shift from coal-dependent infrastructure. Now, basically what we have done with this, with our report, was we highlighted several cases, some of which you'll hear from Jitan and Dato and Eugene. And then we also sent in our recommendations from this report to the ADB. Now, what you can see here is we've highlighted in red the answers from the ADB. And here you can see that we had called for them to withdraw proposed large-scale hydropower projects and not to continue to finance large-scale dams. And the ADB responded by saying that that basically this exclusion would be pretty impossible, but they said that it would be possible in a review of the energy policy. We had raised the concerns about financial intermediary investments, and they basically said, just gave us this short answer here in terms of suggesting that they are making sure that financial intermediaries would go along with environmental and social management schemes. And they have, when we asked them about no-go zones, their response back was that it would be challenging to establish overarching no-go zones. Here you can see, again, further responses from the ADB to our recommendations, including that they are suggesting that the energy transition mechanism may include options for financing hydropower projects, and this would be considered on a case-by-case basis. Also that the ADB is not considering decommissioning any hydropower projects, though we had said that would be an option, and that in terms of financing for distributed and appropriately scaled renewable energy solutions, their response was that they are already prioritizing this, and that when we asked them about articulating and being clear about a zero tolerance policy towards reprisals and retaliation, they suggested they already have such a policy, and they already take it into consideration. So you will hear some other perspectives on how the ADB has been moving forward with their financing of dams. And so I'll pass it over now to Jitan so that he can speak about the dams in India and the financing that the ADB has been putting forward. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us to share on this discussion on the ADB financing of large dam across the region. And today I would like to share on the ADB finance this Lower Kopili hydroelectric power project in Assam. This is one of the many dams which are financed by which has been financed by the Asian Development Bank in northeast part of India. So this is one of the dam. So this is one of the dam financed and built over the Kopili River in Assam. Assam is one of the state in northeast part of India. This is a 120 megawatt dam project in northeast part of India. So you can see the Kopili River, and this is a dam site. And this is the Lower Kopili Dam is a third dam built over the Kopili River in Assam. And the ADB has provided a loan of 231 million USD for this project. And the dam is actually part of the multi-trans financing facility in Assam Power Sector Investment Program. This is under the Trans 3. This dam will be 65 meters high, and it is envisaged to utilize the water discharge from two existing dams, the Kandong Dam and the Umrangso Dam. This is a third dam, as I said, and the Assam Power Generation Corporation Limited is implementing this project. And if you see the larger issues and concern of this particular project, one of the major impact is the issue of loss of land and loss of livelihood of the affected indigenous community, because the project will entail acquisition of 1,552 hectares of land, both agriculture and forest land. And apart from the loss of livelihood, apart from this, the loss of livelihood is attributed not only because of the direct submergence of land, but also because of the massive downstream impact of the existing dam, especially the flood and the riverbank erosion and multiple impact in the downstream areas. And then another impact is the loss of biodiversity, because not just this area, but the entire northeast part of India is part of the two biodiversity hotspot, the Eastern Himalaya biodiversity hotspot and the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. So which means the diversity of flora fauna is very extensive, and in fact new species continues to be discovered now. And the dam site and the catchment area is already is confirmed to have multiple endemic species now, which includes the Western Hulok gibbon, and then Bengal slow loris, leopard, and many other species now which are classified as endemic. And I think one of the biggest impact of this project is the impact in the downstream areas, because there are two existing projects which already cause massive and extensive flooding in the downstream areas, and which entail massive destruction of property and massive destruction of people's land and livelihood. And this is something which the project authorities remain unaccountable. And the current project, this Lower Kopili Dam, will further worsen the downstream impact. And this downstream impact is also worsened by the ongoing unfolding climate change impact, unpredictable rainfall, unpredictable heavy precipitation. And in fact, the catchment area both Assam, southern part of Assam, and Meghalaya is the world's rainiest place. So which means this region received more than 1,500 millimeters of rainfall every year. So which means it also explains the extreme nature of flood in this part of the world. And this particular project will worsen the flood situation. And in fact, if you look at the so this is the case of flood situation. It happened just last year, extreme flood situation in Assam. And part of the region is because of the existing two dams built over the Kopili River. And then if I also want to touch on other issues, one of the major issue of this project is a lack of the cumulative impact assessment, because the dam will entail massive impact on not just on the people, but also on the health, on the climate, on the biodiversity. And And in fact, the cumulative impact assessment is still lacking. The cumulative impact assessment, not just for the lower Kopili project per se, but also because of the existing project, this lower, the existing dam project. No? And I think this is something which is overlooked, and the ADB safeguard policy on environment, if you see the application is still a big challenging part, because the environment impact assessment doesn't fail to touch on the cumulative impact assessment or the downstream impact assessment. And the project also undermined the seismic impact because our part of the region, the Northeast, is again located in very high seismic zone, zone number 5, and it's and the potential for having massive earthquake and the impact on the dam building itself. I think that is overlooked. And there is also a concern with the viability of the dam, because the rivers, the water which the dam project is planning to utilize is heavily laden with heavy metals, no, because of the extensive mining in the upstream portion of the Kopili River. So which means there is heavy corrosion and heavy corrosion of the metals in the existing dam. And in fact, there are multiple accidents. No, in 2019, 2022, there are a couple of accidents that happened due to heavy corrosion because of the water, no, and because of this particular project coming up, it will again raise this question of the viability of the project itself. No, that is one. And another aspect that we are also considering is the issue of how the project undermine the alternative impact assessment, because in India right now, there is a huge growth in the solar sector, no? And in fact, the power price of solar is going down, and the price of power overall is also going down. So which means solar and other alternative means are becoming more viable, no? And I think that assessment is completely lacking. And in Northeast, the push for dam is not just this project, Lower Kopili, but also many other dams which are proposed in the region. So which means the impact on the people, on the land, on the climate will be colossal, and there is the lack of consideration of the alternatives which are becoming more viable in that sense. And this dam will also benefit the corporations. No, the multinational companies are already benefiting from the multiple dams which are built over the Kopili River. And then also the other issues include how the ADB continues to undermine its own safeguard, no? The issues of lack of consultation of the different affected communities, no? Affected communities, not just in the upstream area, but also in the downstream area. So the lack of consultation of the community is very much a concern. The lack of accountability of the project authorities, again, is a huge concern. And we are also worried because now ADB is funding with loan. This is not a grant, this is loan. So which means the government has to repay back, you know, the money with interest. And in our region, there are multiple projects which are an energy project. Dam building is also associated with the construction of a high voltage transmission and distribution line. Some of it is financed by Asian Development Bank. Some are financed by the World Bank. And so this financing of this particular project, and along with other infrastructure, this will entail massive impact on people in the region, and including high indebtedness of the local governments in the region. And I think this is one of the biggest concerns that we have. I also want to touch, finally, that the ADB, they promote dam building. They supported the renewed trust on dam building of the government of India as part of supporting India's clean energy generation plan, and also to support the just energy transition. But I think with the kind of social impact, with the kind of environmental impact, with the kind of climate impact, but also the kind of human rights impact, because our region is again very much militarized area, and conflict prone, and and because of that there is a huge separation of the civil society voice as well. And with this kind of reality, we cannot consider dam building as part of just energy transition. Along with this, I would finally conclude by coming up with few recommendations. I support what Tanya also presented earlier, that the Asian Development Bank and other financial institutions, international financial institutions, should not finance large dam and infrastructure to support the construction of large dam. And because dam cause extensive climate change impact with myriad social, environmental, health, and other human rights impact. ADB should desist from considering last dam as part of solution for just energy transition. And I think this is very fundamental, and we should strongly push for it. And finally, the ADB safeguard policies and other human rights, indigenous people's rights centers to be fully implemented in all its initiatives. With this, I would like to thank everyone, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Jitan. And absolutely, I think all the points that you have brought up around the issues around cumulative impact, the lack of consideration for upstream and downstream impacts, the fact of undermining alternative assessments and really not complying with safeguards, and the absolute also impacts for communities and the rights of people is critical. So thank you for raising that. I think also the key issue about the ADB continuing to suggest that this is part of the just transition without at all recognizing the climate related impacts is also really important. So thank you for that. And now I'll shift over to Dato from Green Alternative and the Bank Watch to talk about the situation in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to. Sorry. I'm just looking. Somehow I don't see my PowerPoint presentation at this point. I will try from the beginning. Okay, here it is. Here it is. I hope you see it. Actually, before starting the experience from the Georgia with the large hydropower plants, first I would like to overview very shortly what is the energy sector, how energy sector looks like, because it is really closely related, whether we need these new hydropower plants or not. The thing is that Georgia is considered to be kind of hydro-rich country, which has quite big question marks due to this climate change, especially because mostly our rivers, not mostly, but all of our rivers are kind of coming from the glaciers. But during the Soviet Union, there were hundreds of hydropower plants that has been constructed already. And right now, electricity generation in a mix, over 75% comes on hydropower plant, which is, and others are kind of covered by gas power thermal power plants, and sometimes with the import especially in the winter time. So why I started with this is that the reason is that this kind of combination or this mix already creates problems for the Georgia, because in the winter time, when the river flows in the rivers are on a minimum level, we are facing serious deficit. While on the springtime, we have excess electricity, and we are simply like, I mean, hydropower plants are really releasing these waters because they don't know how to do this. I mean, where to sell their electricity. Because of the notion that Georgia is the rich in the hydropower, in the rivers and hydro potential, all of our governments since independence, since 90s, were considering hydropower plant as the way to tackle the energy deficit in the country, which cannot be really true, because of the fact that in reality it creates problems. And the way how they started to do this was not really starting of working on the energy strategy of the country or long-term vision or something like that. No, just they simply started to create the favor conditions for the investors, starting to sign the public-private partnership with the guaranteed power purchase agreements, meaning that they were guaranteeing the purchasing of the generated electricity from these power plants from the developers. And without even proper assessment of the neither sector of the even the project justification. And everyone who was opposing this, and this was mainly local population in all the regions of Georgia, they were kind of they were starting, and they started this defamation campaign against us. So when we are talking, for example, let's start with the Shuachevi hydropower plant. This is one of the most controversial hydropower plants with a serious technical difficulties, which has been funded by international financial institutions, including ADB, EBRD, and IFC. The thing and the main problems here you see on the template, you see the non-compliances that has been confirmed by EBRD's redress mechanism itself. What's the problem? I mean, we not only have seen in this project the problems in relation to the environmental social impact point of view, but even from technical and energy point of view as well. Problem is that Shuachevi is located in one of the western part of Georgia, in Nigeria Autonomous Republic. And this was one of the hydropower plants where in the beginning locals were not against of this project. Actually, in all other regions of Georgia, people are against of the hydropower plant, but this was the only project where locals in the beginning were for the project. But what they were requesting proper assessment of the project area of influence and resettlement, because the area is characterized with a really geologically very active processes, and there is no stable layers or geological composition of the mountains. And in this area, this Shuachevi hydropower plant is quite large hydropower plant. It's 187 megawatts, and this plant is kind of hybrid system, like with the two reservoirs and derivation long tunnels, mobilizing waters from the different rivers into reservoirs. And this is kind of daily regulated hydropower plant, which means it is proposed for the peak loads. And they started this project, construction of the project, without detailed geological assessments. They simply started blasting the tunnels, and as a result of it, people's cracks started to appear on the houses of the people's houses. And instead of addressing these wrongdoings, company refused to define the project area in influence and refused the people to compensate for the impacts that they were facing. This was one of the issues that has been identified as non-compliance with the environmental social policy of the EBRD by the EBRD's redress mechanism. And what's more important with this hydropower plant was that $450 million has been spent on this project. And after launching it, after 2 months of launching it, the all main tunnels, it was 3 tunnels, has been collapsed, and company experienced around $200 million losses in this project. Not mentioning the impacts that you are seeing, that land started to kind of drop down people's houses. It became very dangerous to live in these houses, and so suddenly company faced the problems of the paying back to the banks this loan that they took from the EBRD and ADB. And instead of compensation of these locals with these losses, they simply said that they are not really planning to compensate for these impacts that they have. Locals submitted a complaint to IFC, EBRD, and ADB in order to solve the problem. And despite the long negotiation and mediation, unfortunately, at the end of the day, company refused to compensate for these losses. And this project already clearly was showing that despite the fact that IFIs has been involved in this, and IFIs are always claiming that they are bringing added value on the ground, and without them, the project would be much, much worse. This project is really a showcase that despite their involvement, actually not really everything is fine. And on the picture up on your right, you see existing dam after rehabilitation of this project. In 2017, it has been collapsed, main tunnels, and after rehabilitation, they launched this in 21. And you see that the dam still has leakages, literally leaking the water, which already shows that it's still experiencing some technical difficulties. Another even bigger hydropower plant where IFIs are interested to fund, it is Neskra hydropower plant. This is located in another part of the Georgia. It's northwest of Georgia in high mountains of Caucasus. And the thing here is that it was even more controversial project than Shuachevi hydropower plant. One of the issues that I want to underline, and this is quite bad practice that IFIs are usually kind of implementing, is that, and one of the issues in previous presentation, it was also mentioned, it is a lack of proper assessment of the alternatives. And assessment of the alternatives is the key issue in the environmental social impact assessment report. And in this case, in Neskra case, when we submitted complaint to the ADB's redress mechanism, ADB's management responded that when they get involved in the project, the alternatives has been prior to their engagement was already determined and there was not much to change. And this is actually problematic practice because usually in Georgian cases, at least, IFIs are getting involved in the projects on the later stages when everything is defined and so-called nothing can be changed. Neskra is, and on a Neskra hydropower plant, we also submitted a complaint to ADB, to EBRD, to EIB, and this is actually the project where 4 international financial are interested to be funding this project, out of which EBRD and EIB approved the loan but not dispersed. I mean, loans agreement hasn't been signed, while ADB and IIB hasn't signed the loans, fortunately. But problem here is that even if we for a minute forget about the environmental social impact, and it is huge, there has been conclusions done on the Neskra hydropower plant itself from different other international donors, let's say like that, with a significant negative impact of the project on general on the country. One of them was International Monetary Fund, because this project, as I said, before starting environmental impact assessments and all these assessments, there has been signed contract with a guaranteed power purchase agreement for 36 years. Like, Georgia has to pay money for the generated electricity, whether it needs or not, for 36 years to the investor. And this investor of the Neskra hydropower plant is Korean state company K-Water under the Korean Ministry of Environment. And they established so-called daughter company Neskra Hydro, where 10% shares of the 10% holds Georgian State Partnership Fund, and other 90% is for the Koreans. And they mentioned that the International Monetary Fund, that this kind of scheme or this kind of contract creates serious fiscal burden for the state budget, because the money that has to be paid to the company mainly will come from the state budget, and this will have serious implications. Following to this report in 2017, Ministry of Finance of Georgia hired World Bank experts to assess what impacts this project might bring, not only this one, but other large hydros as well, can bring to the state budget, and how it will impact the electricity tariffs in general in Georgia. And they come up with another negative conclusion, saying that it will significantly increase the electricity tariffs for the Georgian consumers if this project will be proceeded far. Further to this, and I'm not right now saying about the redress mechanisms of the IFIs itself, EU Energy Community, which is Georgia is a full member of the EU Energy Community, which means that we have international obligations towards EU to implement the energy directives of the EU in Georgian legislation. And one of the regulation is related to the state aid, and this kind of favors that has been granted to the companies exactly considered as a state aid. They come up with a conclusion, and it was in September last year. They said that the contract that has been signed on the Neskra hydropower plant violates the state aid rules, and this kind of practice should not be proceeded further. So this is kind of prior of the negative assessments that has been already done on the Neskra project. But we also submitted complaints to the ADB, to the EBRD and EIB. Here you see the non-compliances with the PR's so-called project requirements of the EBRD. What kind of non-compliances has been already confirmed by the EBRD's redress mechanism. But before that, we submitted a complaint to the redress mechanism of ADB as well. Despite the fact that eligibility assessment of the complaint was strongly recommending to start compliance review, because there was clear signs of the non-compliances with the ADB's environmental and social policies, somehow board compliance review committee come up with a conclusion in recommending the board that it should not authorize compliance review further. And it was quite strange report coming from this authority. One issue is that Neskra is planned in the area which is inhabited by the Swan indigenous people, which officially are not recognized. And one of the complaint issue was exactly this, that we were requesting from the banks to recognize them within their policies as an indigenous people and obtain free, prior, and informed consent from them. So this become quite politically, and politically from Georgian state point of view, it's not acceptable, and it is one of the key issues that we are still facing problems with that, because and it's important to say that eligibility assessment of the ADB redress mechanisms clearly underlined that ADB should not have dependent on only one scholar, but on several sources of expertise when defining whether swans are falling within the indigenous people or not. So this was one of the clear area that has been found out in this report, but unfortunately further it was not continued. When it comes to Neskra project, it's very recent information in the Korea Times. It's dated 24 April now. It states that from January, and it causes serious scandals, and it also shows what kind of mess is ongoing within the developer company of the Neskra hydropower plant. It says that one of the responsible person in the company who could transfer money from the company's account to its own account, he looks like started, or she looks like started to transfer it. And he was just recently detained in the Tbilisi International Airport by the Georgian police, which means that he was actually directly stealing the money from the company, and was trying to escape from the country. So right now, I think investigation goes on, and this is not only one case. We all saw in the Neskra case how Italian subcontractor Salini Pregillo left the project without further explanation why they did this. And also, since approval of the loans by the EBRD and the EIB, company couldn't manage to find a subcontractor to construct this hydropower plant. And another aspect of this hydropower plant is that all hydropower plants planned in Georgia, except the Shuachevi, which lately started also, protests burst out. I mean, because of the several reasons. When we are saying why locals are protesting, it's not about only the impacts on the livelihoods, but they don't also see why these projects are needed for the country, why they should sacrifice their own lands, their virgin forests, their livelihoods to the projects which really not justifies any need, even from energy point of view. And when it comes Neskra or Shuachevi, both projects really demonstrate how badly these projects are started, continued, and continues even now, and what kind of companies are behind them, and how badly the management is done. These projects are not really justified, not only from environmental social point of view, but from economic point of view, from macroeconomic point of view, from energy point of view, from international obligations point of view. And what's more important, it's not really addressing the challenges that Georgia's electricity sector faces. And one of these challenges is, for example, cryptocurrency mining in Georgia. And this cryptocurrency mining, which consumes like was consuming around 30% of the total electricity consumption of the Georgia. This is the one of the key challenges that hydros cannot really address. And this is very important to mention, because exactly for that reason, because these hydropower plants are not really fully regulation power plants who can regulate like year around. It's just peak load power plants which can work daily at several hours, nothing more. So this gets us back to the issue whether we need this electricity, this generation power or not. So, and none of these projects, not only these two projects, but in general, none of the projects has robust environmental social assessment in these environmental social impact assessments, because it already has been decided to construct, already pre-decided what would be the design of the project, where it would be, and so on and so forth. And the environmental social impact assessment just carries only formal character, just to obtain the formally these environmental permissions and of environmental clearance documents. And also the possible corruption. I want to mention one issue as well with these two projects. These are the two projects from where the confidential contract practice started in Georgia. Even we today don't know who is paying money for rehabilitation of the Shuachevi hydropower plant, which was collapsed due to the non-proper planning of the project. And the contract of the Neskra, where we find out lately what conditions has been set out there, it was because it was just simply leaked. Officially, it has not been disclosed by the government. So here you will see just again the photos of the Shuachevi hydropower plant, and it's also another hydropower plant which was funded by other IFAs. It's EBRD, it's Paravani in 2010, and you just see how much water is left downstream, which already shows how robust has been environmental social impact assessment done in this project as well, despite the fact that IFAS has been involved in this project. This is another one big hydropower plant of Dariali. It's 109 megawatt, and you see downstream how much water was there and how much is left in the winter time in the riverbed. So this was actually my presentation, and in general the practice that we are seeing in Georgia especially is that it clearly shows these projects are really showcased this actually how projects should not be implemented at all, and it will of course in implementation of this project also IFIs bear responsibility, because and it's already confirmed by especially BRD's redress mechanisms that there was not proper robust assessments of the project. So that's it.
Thanks, Dato. I think that was really, really illustrative of how flawed, first of all, the planning is, and then the continuation of the actual development of the projects. It's really helpful to see that. And I think also one thing that is of interest is the fact that Georgia is the next location for the ADB's annual meeting for 2024. So in that sense, there is a chance to again highlight these problems, and consistently, as in our recommendations, we had said that Nenskra needs to come off the project pipeline and it needs to be withdrawn. And there's no reason why the ADB, as well as now the AIIB, continues to keep it on alive as if that it should continue, it should be financed and it could ever be compliant with their safeguards. So thank you for that. And now I'll shift over to Eugene and to speak about the issues in Mongolia that he's been watching as well.
Thanks. I will try to turn this on. Okay, do you see presentation well? Oops. Sorry.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So I will be talking about the very specific and interesting involvement of the ADB in the hydropower, in questionable hydropower. The case when ADB is seeking to support destructive project by funding additional infrastructure, which is not dam or hydropower facility itself, but in this case, a transmission line. However, without a transmission line, which is in this case planned as really a long one for 468 kilometers, it would be absolutely impossible to undertake that hydropower project. In this case, it's called Erdeneburen, and it's implemented in Western Mongolia. To put it in context, Mongolia has a big water infrastructure plan named Blue Horse, which has more than 30 dams planned, most of them with hydropower facilities, on all major rivers of Mongolia, which is pretty water deficient country. And one of them is the Erdeneburen Dam in the lower reaches or middle reaches of Hovd River in Western Mongolia. And since it's pretty much in the middle of nowhere with very low demand for energy, the hope to make it viable is to build a transmission line to the central region, which has much greater energy deficit and where the energy could be mainly consumed. The program threatens many internationally important natural sites, and Erdeneburen Dam is not an exception. second. The dam should produce 90, should have capacity of 90 megawatts to produce electricity, and it's planned to be supported by a 280 million loan by Exim Bank of China, and the developer who signed the contract is Power China, the largest hydropower developer in the world. The dam this construction hasn't started yet, but there is active surveys and drilling works to clarify the suitability of the terrain, conducted by Mongolian and Chinese crews, and local people are completely unhappy with that, and the community also is unhappy, and national and international environmental groups are trying to help community on their request. But in August 2022, the Minister of Justice of Mongolia publicly threatened with criminal persecution any civil activists who attempt to voice criticism against strategic projects and succeed in slowing them down. And particularly in August, the government investigation agency started investigation against Sukhgirel Dugersuren, who is the director of Rivers Without Boundaries Mongolia, and who helped the local herders to formulate their demands regarding dams, including herders from the area. The criminal persecution should be for illegal cooperation with foreign intelligence agency or agent. And foreign agent in this case is myself, the international coordinator of the same Rivers Without Boundaries, who was stigmatized by the being listed as foreign agent by Russian government in 2021, which is a way to disable and stigmatize and deprive of rights leaders of civil society in Russia. At the same time, there is a big smear campaign against Sukhgirel personally and Rivers Without Boundaries and all those groups who oppose the destructive dam construction. Despite intervention of many international groups and United Nations human rights rapporteurs, the charges, as far as we know, have not been dropped. At least we don't have such information. And the ADB due diligence comes right at the time when all this is happening, and nothing in diligence report mentions any of those facts or tendencies. It's written as if it's absolutely easy to have a fair assessment with fair participation of all parties. Local people are very active in opposing the dam, have been very active in last year, and even stopped the equipment which was going to do drilling in certain areas. And we're not quite sure on how ADB will work for resolution of the resettlement issues caused by the Erdeneburen Dam, which is associated with the transmission line. And will this resolution be a precondition for financing the transmission line? How the dam proponents will be held accountable by the ADB on various flaws of the project before it will be enabled by ADB investment or ADB loan. For example, we are not quite sure and will want to ask ADB how it's going to ensure public consultations in the situation when any criticism of the strategic project is suppressed by the government, and there are clear examples of officials being fired, local people being fined, and NGO leaders being investigated, and how ADB hopes to ensure sufficient safe civic space for further consultations during additional assessments. And will it be able to make a clear statement about zero tolerance of reprisals in the case of Erdeneburen Dam and make it a condition in the funding of transmission line? On the environmental side, many environmental impacts are also overlooked in the process of due diligence. For example, fish migration or the alteration of habitat along the Hovd River, impacts on endangered terrestrial species, and impacts on mountainous protected areas. However, the same report really clearly shows and states that the environmental impact assessment prepared for Erdeneburen is worth nothing, and demonstrates that on analysis of its impacts on the Har Uz Ramsar wetlands downstream, which is absent and laughable in this environmental impact assessment. And it also shows that technically it's a very, very immature document, which should be, as they say, improved, revised, and we basically agree with their part of criticism. However, it does not look at the alternatives. The due diligence basically doesn't evaluate whether there are whether there is sufficient consideration of alternatives in the environmental impact assessment, and the only alternative which is considered environmental impact assessment for the transmission line itself are different routes. Meanwhile, Western Mongolia is very sunny and windy region, and it can fully satisfy its own energy demand by additional development of wind and solar parks, and good use of already existing several hydropower plants, which could be work to balance this system. So technically speaking, there is little need to build a huge new hydropower, which will make this region 90% hydropower dependent. It could be much more balanced and modern system with much less destruction. And it is reflected in official documents, both of MDBs and Mongolian government. However, ADB does not discuss that in their reports, in their due diligence report. So ADB hints that there will be a revision of environmental impact assessment. At the same time, it's not clear how this revision will be achieved, whether the results of the revision will be public and will be, as ADB once again states, subject to a fair public consultation. So we are quite doubtful that in current situation, it could be done without a major sort of political push, which would improve the attitude of the authorities towards the civil society and local community involvement in and fair assessment of impacts. So we are quite interested in how it goes, and we'll try to get answers of ADB on all those questions. Thank you for your attention. I had to warn you that I'm a foreign agent that's required by Russian law. Thanks.
Thanks, Eugene. And thank you actually for that entire presentation. Because it really shows as well the way that the ADB is financing associated facilities. And despite the fact that they say they will do this due diligence, so much is left with lacking transparency and uncertainty and complete lack of responsibility, as you say, for the not only the impacts environmentally and ecologically, but also community impacts and the issues around reprisals. And now I will shift over to the Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation. Is that Paul? Great. Over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and to all who is in this forum. I am Paul Belisar speaking for IPM SDL and our members and networks here in the Philippines and around Asia and around the world, especially our indigenous Igorot brothers from the Cordillera. So this event that we are gathered here today is most timely as our indigenous Cordilleran brother and sister celebrate the 39th People's Cordillera Day on the week of 24th of April. From April 22 to April 28, the People's Cordillera Day has been celebrated in different venues actually. In Manila, in Baguio, Benguet, Kalinga, Mountain Province, and even in the US, Canada, and Hong Kong. For the Cordillera peoples, it is a time to celebrate the unity and solidarity in the struggle for self-determination of the Cordillera indigenous peoples. The Cordillera people and the indigenous Igorot began their celebration of Cordillera Day in 1985 amid the resistance to harmful projects that violated their rights, among which included the World Bank-funded Chico River Dam project. It was a project implemented by the Marcos Sr. dictatorship, which did not hesitate to kill indigenous leaders, Makliing Dulag, who wanted to protect indigenous people's lands. In the 70s and 80s, the Marcos dictatorship threatened their lands with huge development projects, including this huge dam. The People's Movement ensued, and the birth of the Cordillera People's Alliance, or CPA, in 1984 signaled an organized expression of a pan-Cordillera movement for ancestral land and self-determination. On April 24, 1985, following Makliing memorials from 1981 to 1984, the first Cordillera Day led by the CPA was held in Mountain Province. So this discussion definitely echoes what the Cordillera people has been living and fighting for. This year, the theme is Sumkad, or to resist, for land, life, and honor. And decades later, the People's Cordillera Day is again celebrated under another Marcos. Although it's a new regime, it is definitely doing the same threats of resource plunder through large energy, including large dams and hydropower projects, and mining applications, and use state security forces to quash people's resistance. Today, the Cordillera region is riddled with 96 energy projects and more than 100 large-scale mining applications. Kalinga is facing JBD Water Power Incorporated's Saltan Dam, which will affect communities in Balbalan and Pinukpuk, aside from the impending Upper Tabuk Hydropower Project, or UTHP, of the Daniel Peckley Jr. and the 52 megawatts Chico River Hydropower Dam of Carayan Hydropower Corporation. Pan-Pacific's Gened dams are still resolutely opposed by the people of Apayao, and the same goes for the people of Ifugao on the Aboitiz Alimit Hydropower Complex. Benguet Mountain Province and Abra are eyed for large-scale mining operations, particularly of Cordillera Exploration Incorporated, a subsidiary of Nickel Asia Corporation and Sumitomo Mining. The threats are not just on the rivers, the water systems, but on the very lives of our indigenous peoples. Apart from continuing the legacies of the previous dictator Marcos Sr., the current Marcos Jr. regime is also an extension of a very bloody experience of indigenous people under the Duterte regime. The reported human rights violations under the new administration are as follows: more than 80 incidents of threats, harassments, and intimidations, 6 incidents of police military visitations, 17 incidents of red tagging forums in the schools and in the villages, and the case of bombings in Gawaan, Balbalan, Kalinga. Judicial harassment and criminalization of dissent are rampant with the abduction and torture of Steve Tauli, the illegal arrest of Jen Awingan, the trumped-up charges against the Northern Luzon 7, the fake enforced surrenderies, and the continuing terrorist tagging. Also, the guilty pronouncement of CPA Secretary General Bestang Dekdeken on her cyber libel case and the denial of CPA's petition for the writ of amparo. Despite these attacks, also exposed the culture of impunity and the limits of the justice system amid the efforts to engage in legal battles. So rights violations, repression, and the financing of projects that take away indigenous people's resources and the development aggression have been prominent in the indigenous people's experience. It is still their experience today. Like in 2020, government forces killed 9 indigenous Tumandok, the indigenous people of the island of Panay in the Visayas region of the Philippines. And they are mainly opposing the Halaur Mega Dam in central Philippines, a project still being financed by foreign aid. In March 2021, the Bloody Sunday Massacre, this is a joint police and military operation in southern Luzon, resulted in the killing of 9 activists and the arrest of 6 individuals, including the killing of Dumagat indigenous people leader Randy and Puroy de la Cruz, who are active members of Dumagat Sierra Madre opposing the new Centennial Water Source Kaliwa Dam Project, or NCWS KDP. It is actually in this global atmosphere and context of climate emergency, economic crisis, and the deteriorating human rights situation that we express the strongest position against the ADB's continuing support and financing of mega dams and large hydropower projects. Earlier, we saw ADB's guidance note on large hydropower plants, which together with other watchdogs, CSOs, environmentalists, and people's organizations, especially indigenous peoples, called out for the following major reasons. One, it has weakened or if not totally avoided to consider the safeguards to avoid the harm and negative impacts of mega dams. For one example, we do not see how their guidelines adhere to the principles that indigenous peoples fought for, like the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Indigenous Peoples' Right to Free, Prior, and Informed Consent, the ILO Convention 169, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the comprehensive recommendations from the World Commission on Dams participated and built by indigenous peoples, organizations, and communities. Number 2, the science and evidence about the carbon footprint, life cycle, greenhouse gas emissions, and the climate change implications of large hydropower dams is overwhelming. Mega dams, we call, are not renewable nor sustainable. Number 3, ADB cannot act business as usual in this current context and atmosphere. The nature of international financial institutions and other imperialist banks and financing system is heavily skewed to profit over peoples by continuously supporting mega dams. It continues to ignore the call of CSOs and indigenous peoples communities to look into alternatives, sustainable community-based water and energy systems, and infrastructure that support real development of domestic agriculture and industries that will really benefit the local communities. For example, IP communities are always promised of development or more affordable electricity, but actually they experience paying more if not one of the most expensive electricity costs, even though a dam has been built in their communities. And also we stand in calling for a temporary restraining order or to stop all mega dams and all its lopsided loan agreements that are linked with corruption and profiteering and rights violations by developers, the companies, and state forces. With all this is not really the first time that indigenous peoples have experienced such dire situations. The monumental victory of the Cordillera peoples, who stopped the Chico dams and other destructive, quote-unquote, development projects. At that time of extreme turmoil, the indigenous peoples went on to be at the forefront of many more struggles in defense of ancestral lands, rivers, waters, and the right to self-determination. Just transition, rights-based, and people-centered development is only possible if indigenous peoples and CSOs and the wider people's movement can sumkad or resist and defend their rights and live together for a development that is people-centered for the people and by the people. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. That was really helpful. And actually, I think it brings us back full circle to the discussion around both the ADB policy and their framing of hydropower as part of the just transition, particularly because we see it at this moment that they are pushing for the idea around financing of an energy transition mechanism in the Philippines, as well as Indonesia, Vietnam, Kazakhstan, and elsewhere. And in the sense of the energy transition mechanism, as Jitan mentioned, actually they are considering that hydropower would be a quote unquote clean option to finance through this mechanism. And so it is really important to push back wherever you are. So great also hear from your side. Thank you. And also just as a note for everyone, Paul was standing in for Beverly Longid. So thank you for that. And now I guess we can open it up for a few questions before closing off. If there are any questions. I see there's the one from Eugene, but at this point, I don't actually think anyone is online who joined the meeting with AIIB. So sorry about that. Are there other questions for any of the speakers? Go ahead, Eugene.
It's not so much a question. I just want to remind everyone that the time works to a certain extent for us, although the situation is very difficult and the banks are trying to flock together to support dams, which is very clear tendency in the last 3 years. The actual construction of new hydropower is dramatically reduced. The statistics released recently for 2022 shows that, again, we have less than or around 20 gigawatts built, which is less than 20 gigawatts built. And again, 16 of those gigawatts are built in China, which is shows that the rest of the world barely built 6, 7. No, I mean, it's not 6, 7. Basically, I don't remember the figure, but around 5 gigawatts built around the world in a year, which means I don't know yet how many projects those are, but this should come to a couple dozen projects, which shows that the industry is struggling to survive, mainly because of rising costs, which have risen 24% in terms of energy they produce, an average in the world, while for all other renewables, at least for key renewables like solar and wind, these costs were reduced. So this means that we actually do have, besides social and environmental reasons, we do have a very solid sort of economic trends working against hydropower, which should be demonstrated to those audiences that support hydropower for economic reasons. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that input, because I think it's true, like you say, is that in fact, I mean, economically, and Dato, as you mentioned as well, economically, it does not make sense. Go ahead, if you wanted to add in.
Yeah, I just wonder, I mean, for example, again, Shuahevi hydropower plant, this is 187 megawatt project, and originally its cost was like 450 million US dollar, which is already quite expensive per megawatt. But again, due to this technical difficulties and collapsing and these accidents, additionally they spend 200 million around, and it already become even more expensive than it was originally. For example, again, Neskra hydropower plant, which is 280 megawatt, the total cost is approximately 1.1 billion US dollar, and this is, I think, the most expensive renewable energy I have ever heard, and it has not started yet, meaning that who knows how much more will be overspent on this project. So exactly, I mean, even from economic point of view, if there is no guarantees from the state, I hardly imagine that it can be bankable by any means. That's actually what I wanted to add.
Yeah, and hydropower is 97% funded by public funds by the states. It's the highest share from among all energy sources.
Yeah, and I think this is actually, it's also really important to keep bringing up because of the fact that despite the economics of it not being not making sense, the ADB still, in terms of its policy and the way that they framed their guidance note, it appears that they're still hooked on hydropower, and it's also remains concerning that, for example, like was mentioned by Paul, that there was, and some of us have mentioned that there is this guidance note and commentary that over 65 civil society organizations put in submissions and submitted comments. And the fact is that they have never responded, and we don't know where this guidance note is in terms of the status. So in terms of timing and this being right around the ADB annual meeting, this is one of our demands as well, is to find out what is happening clearly and transparently with the ADB's decision-making around this guidance note and how that will be giving guidance to their staff around proposed hydropower projects that remain in the pipeline. I know that there's one question in the chat box around the accountability mechanism. There's a couple of people here who are working on the Tanahu hydropower project, so may be able to answer that. But also, Dato, you also mentioned that there were submissions from your side to the ADB. So in terms of your responses you heard, do you want to just feel free to answer that?
Actually, I don't see that question, but generally with this redress mechanism, we are using this mechanism because unfortunately Georgia doesn't have really independent court system, and we really cannot really look for this justice in our courts, which is very unfortunate. But in case of the redress mechanisms, one general pattern that what we are noticing is that even starting from the Paravani hydropower plant in 2010, our concerns are confirmed by these redress mechanisms, but unfortunately, the same approaches are still used then next and next and next in next projects, and it's quite problematic. For example, on Shuachevi case, for everyone it was clear that it was company's fault of these cracks on the houses, making livelihood impossible in these villages. But no one really, I mean, they couldn't, even bank couldn't manage to kind of ensure that these people would be resettled, for example, and ensure their safety. Or, as I mentioned, with this environmental social policies, environmental social policy clearly states what it should be done there, especially like in alternatives, robust social economic assessment, and so on and so forth. And then management of the bank is coming up and saying that, we jumped into this project on a later stage where we couldn't do anything. So, yeah, that's actually problematic. For example, in case of Neskra, we have a complaint in also to the EBRD, and EBRD, it was clear non-compliance regarding the indigenous people, for example, and it was clear that public participation was not ensured, and they were depending only one scholar's ideas whether swans are indigenous or not. But even today, we don't know what processes are ongoing there, because locals are still not involved in this process. They were not consulted, nothing. So this is general concern, is that these redress mechanisms needs to have, I think, more power, more oversight, or I would say possibilities to impact on the project level. Otherwise, we will just receive the conclusions that, yeah, you are right, you were right, there's non-compliances, and then not really much happening.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that in some cases, for example, there have not been full-on complaints going forward around some of the dams. Instead, for example, there is the concerns that have been raised by people impacted by the Nam Niak 1 power project in Laos, but because of the political situation, they're not able to speak out. And instead, it's been documented by the ADB's own sort of independent expert panel that has been there doing some monitoring and has noticed year after year as the project has been built and now is starting to, is generating power, that people continue to raise concerns. And in terms of other projects where there have been complaints going forward, similarly, as has been mentioned, it takes years. It's been taking years for actually any complaints to be fully addressed and for there to be remedy. Are there any last questions? Because otherwise we can wrap up this this discussion. I just see if there's anyone else that has points to raise. Supra?
Yep, I can. I'm trying to open my video, but it's kind of, well, can't see it. Anyway, hello to everyone. I just wanted to make one point that could be important. The discussion in Mongolia around the dams and the big projects is that big projects do have negative impacts and you can't do anything about it. And that you just have to find a way of negotiating with the communities, and that usually the communities, it's very few people, it's the greedy ones in the community who want more compensation. You know the language. and therefore sort of concentrating more on the viability of those projects, the economic feasibility, financial feasibilities of those projects, I think should be more important. And when people see that these projects are questionable, both in terms of economic viability or actually resolving the energy issues in the sector, that they will stop listening to the brainwash that it's very few greedy ones in the community, you know, rustling or causing trouble. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think the kind of, well, the absolute critical issues of how communities are being impacted has obviously been brought forward in this discussion, but it is something that we will again highlight at the ADB's annual meeting, and again also really pushing back on their the rhetoric as well as the claims that hydropower can be part of a just transition, but also that it's actually so-called climate resilient, as I think also was very clear in the different discussions that we had today around what the actual impacts are, and that it cannot be that this is resilience for the future. So with that, I think we can close up. We have one final song as everyone leaves, and this is also honoring the Indigenous people struggles here in the Philippines. It's a dam-themed song that also has a perspective on the resistance of communities to try to stop more building out of dams. Thank you all for joining, and have a great afternoon or morning, evening, wherever you are.
Naninirahan sa gitna ng kabundukan, sama-sama ngaming pinangangalagaan ang lupa ng aming ninuno. Pilit kaming pinapalayas sa aming lupa, lupang pamana. Bakit pilit ninyo kaming pinapalayas sa aming
Thanks again, all, and we'll keep everyone updated as to what happens at the ADB annual meeting for those who are not able